Live, J Street's weekly pod and audio cast, where we interview and get a chance to really chat in depth with the policymakers and politicians who are shaping Israel-U.S. relations and our policy towards the Middle East, Iran, and more. We are really excited to be joined today by one of the good friends of J Street, good friends of us personally, Senator Chris Murphy, who is the junior senator. Although you've been around for a while, so junior just feels like it's totally not appropriate, but a senior statesman who is the junior senator from the wonderful state of Connecticut, where I just was last a couple of days ago, actually.
Nice.
He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and a member of the subcommittee specifically on the Near East, which is the subcommittee that we're most connected to, also on appropriations and housing, and on the HELP committee, the Health and Education Committee. And really, Senator, you've been such a leading voice on foreign policy and America's direction generally. And we do want to get to that once we've sort of ticked through some of the key issues that J Street works on. I know folks are just beginning to stream in here, and we've just put out the notice. This is not our usual time. We are usually on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern, and this time we've rescheduled to be with you live Thursday at 4 p.m. So thanks to everybody for joining us at an unusual time. Next week, we will be back to our regular time at 4 p.m. Eastern with former Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, who will be joining us, which is also going to be a really terrific conversation, as she is the lead negotiator for the Iran nuclear agreement that President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu helped undermine and undo, which set the stage for all of the disaster we're about to talk about now. So welcome, everybody. Please give us a heart, like the video, so that more people on Substack will know about Word on the Street. And Elon, I'm going to kick it over to you to get the conversation started.
Sure. So, Senator, thanks for joining us. I think we should just start with, we're in the middle. We're in continuing this ongoing ceasefire with maybe negotiations in Pakistan, maybe not. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. What's your sense of where we are now on Iran and where you think we're going?
Well, great to be with you all. And let me just say thank you to both of you personally and to J Street collectively. You've been such important partners for pro-peace Democrats, for pro-diplomacy Democrats, for pro-Israel Democrats, but for voters, Republicans, experts, you just have become essential. So thank you. Yeah, listen, I'm glad that the ceasefire is holding, but this is still an ongoing disaster for the United States, for our security, for our economy, for the globe writ large. The fastest way to start repairing the damage that has been done is for the president to simply end this war. His goals have been shifting, so it's not clear even today what he is trying to achieve with this war. But I think it's clear at this point that he is not going to be able to get rid of Iran's nuclear program, their missile program, nor their drone program. The regime change that has already happened has likely resulted in a more provocative, more dangerous crowd being in charge in Tehran. He has created a cascading series of disasters that emanate from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is not just about the U.S. economy being in precarious shape as gas prices eclipse $4 to $5 a gallon, but the global economy is now on the verge of meltdown. 1/3 or more of the world's fertilizer supplies literally stuck in the strait right now. So you're looking at a worldwide food crisis coming. Obviously, Iran is an adversary. We have to have a strategy to counter Iran's influence. Iran does pose a threat to the security of the state of Israel. And I remain, despite my deep disagreements with this Israeli government, a supporter, as just J Street, of the state of Israel. But the reason that both Democratic and Republican presidents have looked at potential war plans with Iran and passed over and over and over again is because all of this was foreseeable. The inability to achieve political ends through military intervention, the crashing of the global economy, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the inability to enact regime change through an air campaign. All of this was foreseeable, and that's what makes this so unforgivable, is that it's not as if this was just, a stroke of bad luck. Everybody who's followed the region, who has thought about military action, knew that it was going to go this badly.
Yeah, if I were teaching a seminar in international relations at a graduate school and ran an exercise on Iran and set people up on teams to run the game through, and the White House team ended up where this White House team has ended up, I would stop the game and like call them out and say, all right, let me review everything that you just did wrong. We're going to start this over. I mean, it's unforgivable. It is such an amateurish group of folks, and the lack of knowledge and the lack of history and the lack of strategy is really shocking. I mean, where do you think that this leaves Democrats in terms of a democratic approach to Iran? What do we offer in the opposition as the better way forward in the years ahead when it comes to dealing with an adversary, which we agree, this is a threat, it's a challenge, whatever you want to call it. What's the better way forward?
Well, let me just double click something you said there, which is the incompetence. This isn't really just a story of the administration making the wrong choice.
Right.
They have also just bungled every step of this. I mean, there was one day earlier this week where, Trump announced that he was sending a team to go negotiate. There was conflict as to whether J.D. Vance was part of that team or not. It was on its way, then it wasn't on its way. Meanwhile, we find out the Iranians hadn't even agreed to negotiate. I mean, it's unfortunately the stuff of farce. And so having chosen this path, I don't think, in fact, I'm sure there was no path that it was going to succeed even with competent people in charge. But what's so heartbreaking is that they both chose the wrong path and did it in a deeply incompetent way. I mean, listen, I think people sometimes feel like we are, a one-trick pony when we keep on going back to the JCPOA. But I just think it's important to remember where we were during the early stages of implementation, of the JCPOA. It was working. We had inspectors all over the country. We had pushed out the reality of Iran getting a nuclear weapon to far outside of a year. That was all very good for the United States and for the region. But here's the more critical thing. We negotiated that agreement not bilaterally between the United States and Iran, but with Europe, Russia, and China. We had Europe, Russia, and China aligned, at least on nuclear policy towards Iran. And that coalition was set up and ready to go to try to take on Iran's other provocative behavior, whether it be their missile program or their support for proxies in the region. And so, yes, it's going to take a long time to reassemble a coalition like that. And lots of things have happened in the meantime to make that less likely. But we have experience to tell us that when we engage in bilateral economic pressure on Iran, they are willing to come to the table and agree to things that would have been unthinkable outside of that multilateral economic diplomacy context. So I think that we have to get back to the business of alliance building, because we've seen that work in order to pressure Iran to drop some of its most dangerous activity. The second thing to say is another obvious one, and maybe I'll just stop here because there's a number of other things that I would say. Once again, we're dealing with an oil power, right? Iran's power comes from their natural resources. Russia's power comes from their natural resources. I mean, how many times do we have to learn this lesson over and over again, that so long as we don't have as a key tenet of our domestic and foreign policy, getting the global economy off of fossil fuels and onto other sources of energy, we are going to continue to empower petro-dictators like the ones in Tehran and in Moscow. So part of the reason that energy transformation has to be part of a democratic platform with respect to foreign policy is because that's how you disempower regimes like the one in Tehran.
Yeah, and I'll just add on top of that, I think in terms of the predictability is, as a guy who actually did play a lot of these war games when I was working at the Pentagon, working on these issues, this is exactly what we said would happen, right? And this is exactly, as you said, President Obama, Bibi Netanyahu pitched President Obama on this idea. George Bush was pitched on this idea. Joe Biden was pitched on this idea. They all took a hard pass because we all gamed it out and came to the conclusion. The one thing I'll say that worked out worse than any of us expected was Iran's ability to actually push its own oil through the Strait of Hormuz while closing it for everybody else. Not something we expected. But I do want to ask you one more question, Senator, just about Iran, and then I think we should pivot, which is, one of the things I know we've talked about is, or I know you've thought some about is, on the one hand, we have a very unified Democratic Party right now opposing this war. I feel really good about that. I feel really good that there was no hand wringing. Maybe there was a little bit in the first couple of days, but very little hand wringing about, are we hawkish enough? Are we tough enough? Just go right to this is a terrible strategic idea and let's just own it and be there. But there was also things we as a party could have done differently in the previous administration and otherwise, as we look at lessons that the Democrats can learn as we look at foreign policy in the Middle East going forward. And maybe when we have the White House back in hopefully 2029, are there lessons that you took from what we have done as Democrats that Democrats should do differently in the Middle East next time they have power?
Certainly. I've thought a lot about this. Well, I think coming to the conclusion that for now, it is important to keep 99% of our attention focused on the current war managers, because this is going to bankrupt American families. It is going to potentially kill thousands of citizens in the developing world. And we don't even know whether the worst in theater is over yet. The president is still holding out the possibility of inserting ground troops. So we have to stay mobilized to organize the public around pushing back against this president. But yes, I think we would be doing a disservice to this issue and to the future of our party's policy in the Middle East if we didn't own some of the mistakes that we made during the prior 4 years. I was somebody that advocated strongly, publicly and privately, for the Biden administration to unilaterally re-enter the JCPOA. Query whether Iran would have followed suit. There's no certainty that we would have gotten back into the JCPOA, but would it have been as easy as it was for the warmongers around Trump to move within a year to all-out war with Iran had they inherited a rebuilt, reconstructed JCPOA with inspectors in the country and Iran not months away or days away from a nuclear weapon, but once again, a year or more away. Second, listen, the decision to make Netanyahu feel like he could push America around with impunity was a mistake. He was able to get essentially whatever he wanted during the conflict in Gaza from the United States. He felt like there was nothing he could do that would ever cause him any consequence. And that headiness that he felt coming into the Trump administration, I think is part of the story. Now, you could say Trump was going to give him whatever he wanted, no matter whether Biden had at some point called the question and said no more weapons, so long as you are running a campaign that's killing tens of thousands inside Gaza. But I'm not sure that it would have been as easy for him to get his way. And then lastly, I wrote an op-ed that I think you guys remember early in the Biden administration, where I made a broader argument for the desecuritization of our entire policy in the region. Thank goodness we have only had 13 Americans killed. Every single one of those deaths is a tragedy, but it could have been far worse because many of our forces in the region really were and still are, to an extent, sitting ducks. We've become targets for the Iranians and other provocateurs. And I would like to see us build relationships in the region that are not solely built on U.S. military deployments. I think we have tended to sort of feed the arms race between the Sunnis and Iran over the years by so heavily investing in one side of that fight. And if we had backed off a little bit in taking sides in the proxy war in the region, I don't know whether Iran's missile program would be as big as it was today. So I think those are all interesting questions for us to consider, but this is probably the most time that I'll spend thinking or talking about it, because the focus really has to be on getting Trump to end the war.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. And you've led us to the logical next set of questions, which relates to the U.S.-Israel relationship and the role that obviously Netanyahu played in the lead up to this war, the decision to pull out of the JCPOA, the undercutting of the legitimacy of the agreement in the first place. It is all backdrop to the vote that happened last week in the Senate on the joint resolutions of disapproval on two particular arms sales. But there's a larger question about what the relationship should be going forward between the United States and Israel, and what is the nature, particularly the financial relationship. And J Street came out last week and we said, we think there should be a security relationship. Israel is an important ally. We as American Jews who care about Israel obviously want the United States to have Israel's back in a security sense and have an effective security relationship. But the country is now a first world economic superpower. It has a $45 billion defense budget, and it can buy what it needs. And the time has come to sort of normalize the relationship between the United States and Israel when it comes to security. And so we've said that when this MOU runs out, we think the time has come to taper off and end financial subsidies for Israel's purchases, which should be able to continue under American law. I'm curious your thinking about the vote last week, how it ties to broader issues about Israel-U.S. Security relationship.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I just want to sort of say what I hope people understand, which is that I am just a rock solid believer in the preservation of a Jewish state in the Middle East. I want Israel to survive. I believe that the policy of the current government is hurting, not helping Israel's ability to survive. I believe that in the long run, there are going to be more threats to Israel's security and to the U.S.'s security because of what has happened in Gaza and what is happening right now in Lebanon and what Netanyahu helped provoke and prompt in Iran. I don't think Israel can survive without a Palestinian state side by side. So all of my critique, my votes in the last year and a half against certain weapon sales to Israel are based upon my belief that it's best for the United States to draw lines with the Israeli government, as prior administrations did, including Republican administrations. But I'm really intrigued by the proposal that you have made, and it speaks to, I think, a lot of the way in which many of us have been thinking about arms sales during the conflict in Gaza. We made the argument that we believe we should apply the same humanitarian standards, the same standards regarding the rules of war to Israel as we do to any other country that we are selling arms to. And it just became pretty apparent to many of us, especially as it related to the blockade of food and humanitarian assistance into Gaza, that the Netanyahu government was not living up to internationally agreed humanitarian standards and the rules of war. And just like we would refuse to sell to other countries if they weren't living up to those standards, just as I argue that we shouldn't sell weapons to Saudi Arabia because of the ways in which they were violating humanitarian law and rules of war in the Yemen conflict, we have to apply that standard to Israel. So I think it's a familiar frame. And I think it'll be useful as we try to build a new conversation in which we are not walking away from a relationship with Israel, but we are making it clear that we can't be involved with an Israeli government that's making decisions based upon what's good for them politically, domestically, and we can't be involved in activity in the region that is transparently detrimental to U.S. national security interests.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about this, and I think it's very similar. The frame I sometimes use is describing normalizing the relationship and treating Israel like a normal friend and ally. That means when they're doing things that don't comport with our interests and values and policies, like we don't work together on that and we don't assist. You don't give them a blank check. It also means that you do find ways to cooperate, and that normalizing needs to come from both sides. Sometimes some of the criticisms you have coming at Israel and the focus on Israel that is, from parts of the party that go too much, like beyond sort of disproportion. It's like if we treat this country like a normal country, that means not focusing all of our energy on the relationship, but it also means having a normal human relationship. And the other thing I think that we've thought about as we've thought about the funding piece here is also this unusual extra funding that the Israelis get through FMF that they don't really need anymore for a country as wealthy as Israel, puts this political spotlight and focus on the issue that it's not good for Israel, is not good for the US, is not good for anyone. I know we just have a couple of minutes left, but we did want to give you a chance, Senator, to share, like you do a lot more than just, Iran and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, more broadly, maybe a final question for you is, how are you thinking about democratic and progressive foreign policy writ large as we head into 28? You're really one of the leaders on this. And where should we be going as we build an alternative to Donald Trump?
Yeah, listen, I think the very quick public reaction to this mismanaged illegal war of choice is proof positive that voters in this country are sick and tired of being dragged into wars in faraway places that we don't understand. They want this country to be protected from harm, but they are pretty convinced that the deployment of forces overseas, especially in the Middle East, especially in the Muslim world, is not the way to protect America. And so Democrats have to have a muscular answer for how we're going to protect this nation without going to war everywhere and anywhere. And to me, that comes in really understanding the way that our foreign policy toolkit is fundamentally misaligned today. The Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese, they're trying to buy up the sort of piping of the global economy. They are the captains of misinformation. They use their energy resources to bully the world and neighboring nations. So I want a foreign policy that contests China for every single purchase of a port or 5G infrastructure or a critical mineral deposit. I want to be everywhere China is. I want the United States and our allies to own the piping of the international economy. I don't want them to get away with lying about us. I want us to be able to tell our story, America's story, everywhere in this world. I want to be proud about it, which is why fixing American democracy is also a big part of projecting power in this world. We don't have much power today because our democracy looks weak and feckless and captured by corporate interests. So a strong foreign policy is only going to be effective when we have a fix to the rupture in our own democracy. So to me, it's about learning the lessons of having a foreign policy toolkit that is overly reliant on military power. I still want a strong military, but I want a strong economic diplomacy, information diplomacy, and energy diplomacy toolkit. And I want us to understand that we are never going to be strong internationally if people view our democracy as captured by oligarchs. So if we do those two things, reorient the way that we project power in the world, concentrate on fixing our own democracy, we'll be in a much, much stronger place if Democrats are in charge of the White House, the House, and the Senate in the coming years.
Well, Senator, that is exactly the vision J Street can sign on to, and we hope that you will be right at the forefront of leading this conversation in the years ahead. We've got some very important elections coming up. J Street's going to be a part of it. I know you'll be a part of it. If you ever desire a platform to announce your plans and intentions, we're here for you. Word on the street on J Street. So just it would be awesome if you would join. Let us know first.
Yeah, but be glad to announce my candidacy for the commissionership of Major League Baseball right here on J Street.
Very nice.
Thanks, guys.
We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Bye. So
he is a very important voice in the Democratic Party on a different type of foreign policy going forward. And I just can't imagine the breath of fresh air to have people like him and Chris Van Hollen and others who are going to be really the shapers and the makers of foreign policy in the next generation.
Yeah, and I will say, Jeremy, one thing that like really resonated with me from the way he was talking about our approach to the Middle East, and also what he was talking about in terms of a broader vision for foreign policy. As we read something I've been talking about for a long time is when we think about where the US has been successful in the world in terms of projecting power, building alliances, increasing our influence, really it's been more in the Indo-Pacific and in Europe. And in those places, our focus is first and foremost, let's use our economic power, let's use diplomacy, let's use the power of ideas, let's build our alliances. And then, yes, let's underwrite all of those ideas that are so powerful and appealing to our allies. Let's underwrite it with security that comes from a strong and powerful military that everybody understands, is able to defend our partners and allies and friends from any potential adversaries. So the military piece is there, but these other things lead. It's only in the Middle East where for the last 30 years, really since the end of the Cold War, and especially since 9/11, it's always, what's the military solution to this? I really think when we talk about the 23-state solution, it fits so much more with that other frame, the frame of diplomacy, the frame of regional integration, the frame of building connections amongst allies and partners, and economic integration, and pushing for democratic values and freedom for and equality for people. That's the way we need to be thinking about the Middle East, instead of always, okay, what country are we going to be invading next, or what are we going to be bombing next to prevent this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah, and it relates to also the budgetary choices that are being made. And I think nothing makes me more angry and more frustrated than the concept that we might spend, or we see a proposal to spend $1.5 trillion on the military this year. It's such an inconceivable number. Nobody who's watching and listening can really get their heads around just how much money that is, and the choices that implies about the things that we're not going to be doing. Imagine taking hundreds of billions of dollars, instead of putting it into more hardware and more missiles and more bombs, putting it into the soft power, putting it into the economy, putting it into investing in green energy, putting it into the kinds of development work, economic development that will create a better future and make friends for us around the globe. The whole concept of the way that we are military first, and our dollars go down the pipeline to the Pentagon and don't have an off ramp into the types of things where we need to be spending it, is so frustrating. And it's the same mindset that says Iran is a bad actor, we have to do something. And then the do something is, let's just drop bombs on their heads, as if that's going to achieve anything. It's like schoolyard bully tactics. Spend money on your weapons and then drop bombs on people's heads. And that is not a foreign policy. We have got to have a completely different approach to America's role in the world.
I will tell you, Jeremy, talking to my Israeli friends and security experts, this is also the concern with Netanyahu policy and Israeli government policy, especially since October 7th. We've had one military success after another. We roll back
tactical success.
Exactly. Tactical success. And then the question is, all right, you knock back Hezbollah. How do you politically consolidate that and actually turn that into a long-term alternative when you have, a government in Lebanon that wants to work with you on that, right? Like how do you from the beginning, the ultimate experience is in Gaza, right? Where, I was at the White House pushing from very early, let's plan for what we do the day after and how we're going to replace Hamas, not just destroy the place. And you could get nowhere with the Israeli government, especially with Netanyahu, even though you had a lot of security officials who wanted to work with us on this and understood the political limitations of Israel. We're not doing this, or at least the political limitations of this current Israeli government and coalition. And it's also true of Iran. right? Where Israel demonstrates remarkable capacity. I mean, nobody expected Israel to last June achieve air superiority over Iran in a matter of days and be able to fly at will, over Iranian territory, a country of 90 million people, huge territory, far away from Israel, really impressive militarily. But what is that actually translated into? Essentially nothing, because you have no strategy to actually consolidate, your military victory and turn it into a political victory. And
There's an argument to be made that strategically Iran is stronger today than they were before the war. There's an argument that the United States is a weaker global player as a result of this war. Yet, technically speaking, the military tactical objectives may have been achieved, and so it is precisely this lack of thought, this lack of strategy, this lack of planning, lack of understanding, and all people seem to do in this administration is circulate the videos of the bombs blowing up a plane or a building, and yeah, we can do that. And the targeted assassinations and the walkie-talkie operation, these are tactical achievements, but they don't advance your strategic national interest. And that's, I think, the fundamental flaw in both countries right now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they could advance the national interest if you
Yeah,
had a
part of
plan
it.
to follow them up and actually consolidate, instead of just saying, "Wow, that was cool, and we're winning, and let's keep going again and again and again."
Yeah.
And look,
And,
yeah. Mhm.
and I was going to, sort of relate that. You mentioned, folks within the security establishment in Israel who recognize that this is a political, vacuum in Israel's leadership. The former Israeli security officials who make up what's called commanders for Israel's security. I've sometimes talked about it here on Word on the Street. Um, they are probably 80% of the retired brigadier general, IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet military intelligence, that whole echelon of folks. And they are constantly highlighting the things that are happening within the Israeli security structure that are undercutting Israel's long-term interests. And one of the things that they've highlighted just this week again is what's happening on the West Bank, and the failure of the IDF and of the security establishment to have the political backing to actually use some of that tactical prowess to deal with this crap that is happening on the West Bank. I mean, this is insane. It is immoral. It is something that violates everything we believe in as Jews and Americans, and I'm sure for most Israelis. And the Israeli tactical prowess isn't being allowed to be used because of political leadership in the government, as well as, I would have to say, some of the higher levels now of the security establishment.
Yeah. No, look, I actually think in the Biden administration, early on in the war, we did prioritize what was happening with settler violence, and applied some pressure on the Israelis. And in response, orders came from the very top of the IDF to the rest of the troops to contain this. And for a short while, it was contained, which to me was an indicator of, if they want to, they can stop this. The IDF is, frankly, unfortunately, entirely complicit in all this. It does come from the political leadership, and to some extent now, the military leadership. But the way if folks don't understand, maybe I think some of it, maybe we've talked about this before on the show, the way rules of engagement work for the IDF, there's two things happening here. One, the way rules of engagement work in the West Bank is the IDF is there to protect Israelis. So Israelis, violent settlers, go out and attack a Palestinian community. The IDF goes with them. The IDF is not there to protect Palestinians, so it stands aside. Palestinians start to protect themselves. They might throw stones in response. And then the IDF comes in and arrests the Palestinians. And so that's really an upside down way of operating.
Right. And to be clear, that is a contravention of international law. Because when you are the military occupying power of a territory, your responsibility as the occupying power is to the people that lived there when you occupied it. You are not allowed to have your people move in the first place, but your responsibility as a military is to ensure the safety and well-being of the people that you have now occupied. And so what that you've just described is itself a deep violation, a disturbing violation of international law, the very concept of what it means to be an occupying power.
And the crazy part is that's actually less bad than what I'm about to tell you,
Ah!
which is the reality is, especially since the war in Gaza started, you've had a lot of the active duty troops have been positioned in Gaza or positioned in Lebanon, which means it's reservists who are mostly doing the work of the West Bank. Increasingly, they're defaulting to reservist units that are made up of people who live in those areas in the West Bank. And so now you have these settlers who are putting on the IDF uniform, going out there, the next day coming home, taking it off, and going out and committing these acts, interchangeable. And so I think you have both stories of enabling and abetting this based on IDF rules of engagement, but also members of the IDF just becoming active participants in all of this. And it's really gotten entirely out of control. And you see it. I mean, the only thing that's heartening about this is you do see an increasing recognition of how bad this is, not in Israel as much, but at least internationally, certainly in the United States. You look at the legislation we're pushing, the West Bank Violence Prevention Act.
And the Ceasefire Compliance Act, by the way, the idea that American weapons shouldn't be able to be used on the West Bank, whether they are paid for by us or not. Our weapons should not be able to be used on the West Bank while this is happening. And that is something called the Ceasefire Compliance Act, which is another piece of legislation. We've talked about the sanctions on settlers through the West Bank Violence Prevention Act before, but this is another piece of legislation to say that these weapons that we either sell or provide can't be used in the West Bank or in Gaza if they are not in compliance with our laws and our policies.
Yeah, I know. That's just keep pushing on both of those
Right.
as best we can, because this right now, what's happening is entirely non-viable.
Absolutely. Well, let me close us out here on a more domestic political note. In addition to all that's going on in the Middle East and all of the issues that J Street focuses on substantively, we also are a political organization. And you, Elon, are a resident of Virginia, which had a referendum this week to allow tremendous redistricting. I mean, really a remaking of the entire map of Virginia. Tell us how you feel about this and how you feel about being on the tip of the spear of gerrymandering.
Well, I have mixed views about this, right? I mean, on the one hand, I voted yes, and I think that this is absolutely what we need to do because Republicans are doing it all over the country in places like Texas. And the only way to fight fire in this case is with fire. And if they're going to do this, then we have to. And otherwise, we just sit back and unilaterally disarm. That's not a way to operate politically. I'd be much happier if Republicans were to agree to some kind of national legislation or agreement, which Democrats have been offering for a long time, to end gerrymandering across the board. That's what would be healthier for our democracy, more reasonable for our country. And I don't love to go out and vote for gerrymandered districts, but, and I'll say this, right? Barack Obama, when he left office, one of the things he put real energy into together with Eric Holder, if you remember, was working against gerrymandering. Well, Barack Obama was all over my TV for the last couple of weeks with advertisements telling people to vote yes.
Right. And this brings me back to like the Michelle Obama versus Hakeem Jeffries quotes, right? The attitude that I really believe in my heart and soul. When they go low, we go high. I mean, I love that. When Michelle Obama said that, it resonated with me. I much prefer going high than going low. Screw that. They've gone so low. When they go low, we need to hit harder. And that is what Hakeem Jeffries said this week. And that fight, that desire to say, look, what if they're going to do X and we can do Y, and Y is within the law and it's totally appropriate, we have to be in the arena and fighting, and we have to win because the stakes are so enormous. And so I couldn't agree with you more, Elon. There's so many things that are undercutting the health of this democracy, and gerrymandering is one of those. And we can go through a long list, including money and politics, if we needed to. And when we get the chance, as Democrats come back into power in this election and then in 2028, I think the health of our democracy and a democracy preservation agenda needs to be front and center for the Democratic Party in the next time that it has the chance to make the laws of this country.
Yeah, no, I think I'm 100% with you. And in the meantime, like we have to fight back as
Yep.
hard as we can. And so that's what I did. I mean, the benefit,
And we won. And we won. This is
there
sort of
was
four-seat swing, possibly.
Yeah, 4-seat swing. There was a judge who then put a freeze on it, but that judge has also put a freeze on a series of other actions associated with this, all of which have gotten overruled by the
All
Virginia.
overturned on appeal. Yep.
So I think probably this is what's going to happen. Like I said, I wish the world was a different place, but we're realists right now. We have to fight. We have to win. That's
and
what
our job is, to make the world a better place. That is what we are doing. We're working. Everything we do at J Street is to make the world a different and a better place, and that is our goal. So, thank you, Elon, for joining us from Philly, and thank you in absentia to Senator Chris Murphy for joining us. He is here in Washington, but he's the senator from Connecticut and a real friend of J Street. And thank you to all of you for joining us here on Word on the Street Live. We are coming to you this week on Thursday at 4, but don't be confused. We will be back at our normal weekly time slot next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And I'm really excited to have a good friend of both of ours, Wendy Sherman, the former Deputy Secretary of State, and someone, I can't imagine a better person to be talking about Iran with than the lead negotiator of the JCPOA. And so I'm looking forward to that conversation, Elon. And I hope maybe we will be in the same place next week. I'm not sure what our schedules hold. So
I think so, but who knows?
Who knows? But no jacket next week. You're not allowed to wear a jacket next week.
Yeah, I know. I just didn't bother to take it off. Plus the white shirt. I don't like the,
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.